Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Ivan Francis Wilbanks, and I'm your host here with the podcast Cutting the Strings. Today, we are going to be talking about a video that has gone viral on YouTube for a couple of different reasons. And we're talking about the Amanda Searles versus 20 Black conservatives debate video that was hosted on Jubilee. Now, granted, I have a few thoughts about Jubilee specifically, but this video and this debate exposes a lot of important things in the dynamics of Black American culture and where we currently find ourselves in 2025. So, without further ado, and let's just jump straight into it, the bigger things that this video exposed is it exposes that the political ideologies of Black people are not a monolith. I think that's the first thing that it exposes. But the second thing that it exposes is that the average person, be it African American, non African American, in 2025 has a very limited view or understanding of African American history and also African American history when it comes in line with the political history of the United States. And that's important to really jump into and discuss because I think that people often fail to understand that in the United States of America, the culture of slavery has had a profound impact in how people are living their lives today in 2025. People sometimes don't understand, and Amanda Searles brought this up in the debate, that in the United States of America, from the year 1619 until the year 1865, there was legalized slavery in the United States. And so the period of time between 1619 and 1865 basically creates a period of over 240 years of subjugation that was allowed by law against people of color, mainly Black people, to be slaves or subject to indentured servitude, which is a specialized way of saying basically slavery. The issue is that when we listen to these people discuss their points and discuss their viewpoints, it's coming with incorrect facts, incorrect information, or it's information that has been presented in a way that has either been whitewashed or sanitized to try to reduce the sting of exactly what has happened. And I think that that's extremely concerning because I remember when I was going through grade school, back in the early 2000s up to 2011, we were taught about Black history and we were taught the not so nice parts of it and the nice parts of it because history is not always going to be flowery and pretty. And I think that what we see here is the direct result of years of divestment from the educational system. One thing I will say is, as someone who's 32 years old and came up in the No Child Left Behind era of education, I was able to get an education that was well-rounded enough where it did talk about American systems and American politics, but also we got the education about African American history and the impact of African American history on our modern day American society and what exactly Black people and people of color contributed to American society for it to be how it is right now. The reality of it is that as I listen to a lot of these people talking on this platform and responding to points that are offered by Amanda, and some of them even talking over her and trying to even mansplain her, quite frankly, um, it was very disheartening to listen because I was listening to things that would have been easily disproven by a fifth or sixth grade history class. And I know at this particular stage in the game where we currently are at in American history that this divestment or this, I guess, brain drain, so to speak, and this failure to provide this information is at this point now intentional. I find it that it is intentional to not educate people on their history and to not educate people on how things actually happen and to sanitize it because it's a matter of convenience. And the one thing that I've learned and doing all of my readings from the time of undergrad up to now, and even doing, my studies as, a communications and culture major in undergrad, I had a minor in sociology with an administration of justice minor or rather focus. And when I went to law school, that same ideology of learning the political system and learning the legal system helped me begin to understand that the reason why American society operates how it operates is largely because people are ignorant and don't have the knowledge. And I'm not saying ignorance in the terms of, oh, someone's ignorant as a form of a negative connotation, like I'm name calling, but a matter of ignorance as of they don't have the knowledge, the requisite knowledge to be able to be armed in an argument or a discussion that requires some wits or some facts and some information. And that lack of information, that lack of knowledge, that lack of education translates and perpetuates itself over and over again. And the one thing that I remember reading in one of the books that I've read a long time ago, and I forgot which book it was or what passage it was, but the statement went along the lines of the easiest way to subjugate a people and the easiest way to further marginalize and disenfranchise a people is to divest them of education, to separate them from their language and their culture, and to completely change the narrative of what has happened in the past. And that is very much true. And that's what we see surfacing in this video, where we're watching African American people who are, some of them are even around my age, that are walking around in the world with a very confused sense of exactly what happened from 1619 up until now. And that is very disturbing, that as we sit here and we listen to these people talk about, African American history from their perspective, it's not with the facts in mind. We had someone speaking on this platform essentially trying to say or trying to assert that Black people voluntarily came to the United States of their own volition. And that is not true. But it's unfortunate because we actually have people in 2025 writing textbooks that essentially try to say that African people came to the United States voluntarily beginning in 1619 to work as indentured servants. What they fail to realize is that the term indentured servant basically means a slave. And I think that they want to recharacterize or romanticize it to lessen the sting of the horrors of slavery that took place. Another thing that was brought up is this notion of slavery happened oh so long ago, and why should we care about it? And we should move on. And we keep pointing the fingers at other people. Oh, all right. This is one of those things where it gives me extraordinary heartburn because I have to walk through this very slowly in a way where I don't inflame others, nor am I going to inflame myself by saying this. But I think that that's just a load of BS. It's a load of BS because the reality of it is that you can't say that slavery happened oh so long ago and we should just forget it. I think that people forget that after 1865 up until 1877, there was Reconstruction. And then after 1877, there was the Black Code period, which basically was the beginning point where a lot of states and a lot of legislatures across the country, including Western states and mostly Southern states, started to enact laws that forbade people of color, mostly Black people, but also it included people from Asia, like China, or even forbade people of certain other native groups from being able to actively participate in day-to-day life, whether it be voting, whether it be able to go to have the same accommodations, whether it be able to sit in the same train car or sit in the same restaurants as everybody else, right? And so from 1877 all the way up to 1964, we have basically a system in which we have quote unquote separate but equal, but it was never equal to begin with. And I think that the reality of it is that when we listen to these people talk about this, they basically try to conveniently ignore all the history and all the political goings on in the United States from 1877 to 1964. And I find it absolutely insane to try to avoid essentially close to 90 years of history to conveniently make your point. I think that that's just absolutely ridiculous. But then it gets even worse because the thing is, we don't talk about the systems in which were developed post Reconstruction to continue to subjugate people of color, not just Black people, but I will say, again, Hispanic American people and Native American people also get impacted by this, where you deal with redlining. And redlining then becomes a matter of, okay, well, we're going to have the bank and the FHA decide which neighborhoods are desirable versus which ones are not. And you can look in the 1935 underwriting manuals from the FHA, and you can look and see that even in the 1935 manuals, they were guiding people on which areas were, desirable and which areas were not, based on the census information that designated a person's racial identity. And so you can look at those maps from 1935, even from Atlanta, and see how each area is marked off. And even if you're looking to this day at the racial breakdown and distribution of some of these same neighborhoods in Atlanta, they remain largely the same as they were in 1935, which means that through some of these measures, segregation is allowed to continue, right? So while, people say slavery was oh so long ago, redlining is a child of slavery and has still continued to persist in its varying forms and fashions up to this day. Or another example is talking about the disparate impacts of educational attainment and the ability to acquire medical care, right? The ideology of education for people of color didn't exist, right? Up until the 1870s, when Reconstruction happened, it was illegal in many, many states to actually educate a person of color and allow them to go to school. If a Black person was taught or educated or was even allowed to read and knew how to read, they would be punished. And so I think that when we talk about it now in the context of 2025, we're now looking at areas that have been divested of education. We're looking at school districts that are underinvested in, and because they perform poorly due to their lack of investment, they get further penalized. So the cycle just goes on and on and on. And I think that when listening to this argument and this discussion, a lot of that wasn't captured, but also the reality of it is that a lot of the people don't know that amount of information to engage in conversation or a meaningful dialogue about it. And I'm going to be real, that is scary because we live in a world where everything is at our fingertips. The same way how I am relaying this information to you or talking to you right now is by virtue of me having an internet connection and me being able to access millions of articles on Google Scholar and millions of articles on Wikipedia so I can get the primary source and find it as find primary sources. Or, it's crazy that, I could go to a local library while it's still open and get that information so I can read up on it. But there is a willfulness of these people to still not pick up a book, pick up their phone, pick up their tablet, pick up their computer and type in Black history in Google Scholar to find a book that talks about it or find an article that talks about it. And I just begin to really be concerned for our future as a society when the access to information is so easy and so there, but we are now actively choosing to remain willfully ignorant, and we're no longer willing to engage with the information that is present and has been present for years. The other thing I also want to point out that came out in the dialogue is some people trying to say that it's false news and this is information that's been skewed by a particular liberal agenda. I'm gonna be honest with you. Before there was a discussion of a quote unquote liberal agenda, many of the primary sources that talk about what happened during slavery, during Reconstruction, and even during Jim Crow and the post Civil Rights Act or during the Civil Rights Movement, a lot of that was before the concept of what this pro-liberal agenda is. I think people don't remember that there was a diametric shift in the political ideologies of the American political parties beginning in the 1960s into the 70s, where essentially they flipped. So essentially, while the Democratic Party was seen to be more conservative, in the 60s and 70s, that flipped, and then it became the Republican Party, to be known as the more conservative party. The reality of it, though, is that because people don't know and don't have that information or that knowledge, or they don't want to arm themselves with that knowledge conveniently, they basically walk around trying to blame people or systems and institutions that shouldn't even be holding the blame to begin with because the timeline doesn't make sense. And I think that it's easier for people to accept 2 and 2 not making 4 for them to inquire why it doesn't make 4. So without really saying much else, I think that, I'm not going to say that I stand for Amanda Searles 100%. I do think that there are some aspects of Amanda Searles that are problematic. But I will say that when looking at this video and looking at how she made her arguments were factual. The fact checker on the video actually was able to pinpoint most of her facts as being in line with what the published information says, right? But when you're looking at a lot of the contenders from that 20 conservative group, the fact checkers up there saying, no, what they're saying is wrong. The information is not right. People are saying percentages that are much higher than what they actually are. And, they're just not quoting things the way that they should be quoting them. So I was very much happy with the fact that Amanda relied on facts and information. I'm not giving her 100% credit. I will give her 90% credit because, again, there are still some aspects of, how she engages in some of the dialogue that still can be considered problematic in some of her other work. But this was something that highlighted what we needed to highlight based on the current place that we find ourselves in American society. Now, the final thing that I wanted to talk about, which ruffled me immensely, and this is somebody who's worked as a legal professional for the last 6 years and has colleagues who are from the inner city who also work as prosecutors or defense counsel who handle criminal cases. And it is this notion that black on black crime is a problem. I want people to understand, and this was mentioned in the video, but I want people to understand something. By virtue of how housing patterns in the United States has been, in most places in the United States, most people of the same ethnic group are going to live in close proximity to one another for two reasons. And this is, again, sociology and me understanding sociology. People are going to live in clusters of their own ethnic group because they feel a sense of familiarity and safety, right? So the ideology of I don't feel safe around someone that looks like me, that actually is a red herring to what the research has shown. The research has shown that people over the history of thousands of years are more likely to live around people who share the same phenotypic features, but also the same linguistics, the same spirituality, and what have you, because humans are innately bound and are attracted to creating social systems that create a sense of security for multiple reasons, whether it be for economic security, whether it be to secure the future of progeny or children, what have you, right? And so when the argument is said over and over again that Black people commit more crime to one another, they don't, again, think about the fact that Black people will live in our own communities because we believe that it is safer than living in a community full of people that may not look like us, and that we have been educated to believe based on our experience in this country that are going to be hostile towards us. So I just really struggle with the notion that when we hear, oh, Black people need to stop killing each other, well, why is it that we don't have this conversation with other ethnic groups that live in insular communities, right? When we talk about Native American people, right? Native American people who happen to sometimes be wrongfully relegated to a reservation, they deal with crime in their own communities as well. They manage their own crime because they have their own court systems. That is the difference. But at the end of the day, the reality of it is that because they live in an insular community where everybody of the same cultural ethnic group reside with one another, yeah, there's going to be crime against the same ethnic group because they all live in the same place. The same is true in majority white or European American communities, right? That is also the same thing. The difference, however, is we don't, again, talk about the difference in reporting. We don't talk about the difference in news reporting because data reporting and news reporting are two different things. What I found in my own research when I was in school for communications is that news programs are more likely to have coverage of violent crime and violent criminal offenses in communities of color than non-communities of color. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that because it brings that sensationalism, right? It brings the notion of people of color are dangerous and the black neighborhood is dangerous. You shouldn't go there. But by virtue of basically highlighting a group of people and the disproportionate amount of crime that goes on, they completely skew what the numbers look like. They give the public an impression of the entire community being unsafe. They give the Black community a sense of, oh, we're doing it to ourselves. Because when you cut on a news program and you see only Black on Black faces every single time, without the acknowledgement that the same thing happens 20 miles away in a suburb, right? They don't get the notion that this is really something that every community deals with. So they get this notion of, oh, well, it's just a Black on Black issue, and it's not. I really implore people, especially in 2025, at this stage, at the time I'm making this recording, to seriously start looking at your primary sources and looking at real data from places that are trustworthy and not ran by some sort of PAC or some sort of special interest group. Because the reality of it is this: information in the United States has gotten to a point where data is becoming less and less reliable, primarily due to people using AI, primarily people relying on false information and now republishing it as the fact, and also people actively going out their way to destroy and delete primary sources, the original primary sources, to try to rewrite history. CEG, the Smithsonian Museum debacle that is currently happening right now. The reality of it is that we are seriously in trouble as a society when we are now operating with a skewed sense of what the real history and the real facts are, and now promulgating that and putting that up on a pedestal on a platform known as Jubilee or on YouTube even, where millions of people can watch it. And you are literally giving a platform to people that really don't even have a good sense of basic 5th and 6th grade civics and history. And you're giving them a platform to now spread that to the masses, where YouTube is now available to young, impressionable people that weren't given good education to begin with. And you're now letting them know that this version of what they're saying is the truth, and it's not. And I think that that is so dangerous. And I think that, I'm going to be real with you. My critique is more towards Jubilee for allowing these people to come on to this program without appropriate facts and information, and allowing themselves to give and serve dangerous anecdotes and skewed political dog whistle talking points as a way to try to stand in for facts. Absolutely ridiculous. And I think that, even though there's a fact checker on the screen to tell us if it's BS or not, it's still not sufficient, because now we've made people famous who have no idea of what the true reality of Black people has been since 1619 up until now. So, without really saying much else, this has been this episode of Cutting the Strings. And again, I thank you so much for joining in today. And please have a great one. I hope to see you in the next one. And so long.